Welcome to our hot takes, which we like to do after a variety of, like, whatever we go to as DIF and our DIF members go to. We like to do hot takes. Usually what we try to do, the best thing is if we disagree about something, but, then it can be hotter. But usually we just start by everybody saying what are their big takeaways from the events, and we go from there, and then the audience can ask some question, or I'll ask some questions. All four of us were at the DICE unConference, and I think we should start with Frederik, who was our host.
Yeah,
And
hi.
tell us a little about how it was, and what were your big takeaways, and what were you pleasantly surprised about, or not so pleasantly surprised about? Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, I was part of organizing DICE, which was nice, and I'm glad that a lot of people showed up. Um, I think that one of my big takeaways is that a lot of the conversation has sort of just in time switched from technical things to being a little bit more about how do you actually deploy these things and get adoption, and especially about verifiable credentials. So obviously none of the EU countries will actually meet the deadline that they have set for themselves for verifiable credentials, but there are some projects that will at least do partial things. And for that reason, people are really starting to look into why would people actually do it, right? And it usually comes down to money, which can kind of sound very capitalistic and so on, but in some sense, it's kind of like, okay, but it costs money to run a server, it costs money to pay my rent, so I need to get paid, and so on. And that means that there needs to be some money in the system. Like it needs to be some incentive for people to actually do things. And for some actors in the ecosystem, it's kind of obvious why you would do that. Like if someone presents you a verifiable credential, you get some information that you probably want for some reason, but it's very unclear still why you would like give other people verifiable credentials. So this was a big takeaway for me, sort of as expected, that nobody has really solved this yet, but people are now starting to care more about it, which I'm pleasantly like not surprised maybe, but it's nice because I've cared about it for a long time, and only recently have I started sort of hearing about it from a lot of people. So I think that was a takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of why we find ourselves in the place we're in, because the level of investment that it takes to issue and accept credentials and issue and accept identity isn't the level at which the benefit comes. Like the benefit is to this whole network, but then each individual entity has to do work. And that's why we end up with Google as an identity provider, because they collate all that's where the benefit is, at this sort of wider network level. And I think that's one of the things where, like, the EU hasn't fully figured that out yet. Like, where is that? Because when you have a benefit to the network, where you did the investment of work isn't necessarily where the money comes out. And it's like, okay, well, how do you balance that out? So yeah, I think that's a really great takeaway, and a lot of what many of the vendors and developers are talking about. Yeah. How about you, Agne?
Hey, so for me, it was the first dice. It's very hard to compare on how the conversation is changing. I, like Frederik, really like that there was conversation about the business models. It seemed, for me, since I started working in identity, there's a lot of technical discussions and people trying to choose the best new cool technology. But I don't know, I look at it maybe simplistically, like all of it does its job. And so that part, like you can add on top of it, but it's more or less figured out. And now we need to solve the other parts. And EU is very interesting and unique in the way that the legal stuff is kind of sorted. So the business one is the one that's left. I think my main takeaway was that I really enjoy the conversations about the business wallets, and I don't remember if anyone said it or it was just kind of the consensus in one of the sessions that it seems like the business wallet might come first instead of the personal wallet in terms of adoption. And the reason for that, I think there's two. So one is the business model. I think it's a bit easier to figure out on the business wallet. And another big thing, I think it's also there's a big lack of solutions in the market. Like with personal identity, we already have quite successful solutions in different countries. So everyone recognizes that the new one will be better, but that adoption will take a while. But with business wallets, we don't have that problem. So seems like there's lots of people working in the space, building in the space, and there's also lots of appetite for consuming business identity as well. So that was very interesting for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because what we've got in Europe is sovereign nations issuing digital identifier wallets and digital sign-on document, and everybody's got that. And then the big complaint is, wow, we're still paying 3.5% minimum to these credit card companies if you're a business. And that's not European technology. And so I think that's an interesting observation, that even though the requirements aren't out yet for the business wallet, or at least not the architecture requirements, that there's more of a need in the market in Europe around that. So that's a really interesting observation. That's cool. All right. How about you, Max?
Firstly, hello everyone. It's great to see you all again. I would say from my side, there's definitely similarities to Agne's take, which is technically, I would say from my lens, I was very interested from a business wallet perspective. And I think one of my key takeaways is, I'd say coming from South Africa and coming to or attending DICE, we've always held Europe to kind of the gold standard related to decentralized identity or verifiable credential technology, and understandably so. That certainly hasn't changed. But something that I think was definitely carried through in my mind and a perspective that I got while there is the similarities and the challenges around the world, and how even with the business wallets and like say in a South African use case, the questions that we have currently as of today are still being addressed within Europe. And I think in many ways it was a very satisfying thing to see that we kind of all in this together, and these challenges aren't just, oh, it's not like just localized. Of course each region's going to have their own challenges, and for example, as Frederik mentioned, business model is always going to be a question of how to address whether or not it's charging the business to simplify it. I mean, only time will really tell, but I think that's just a key thing that I took away. And then beyond that, Grace, based on our actual conversation, I personally am just a heavy advocate for DIDCOM. So is my company, and technically hearing or having those conversations where you could actually hear that others also shared a similar notion that DIDCOM may have a role to play in terms of like long preserving business connections and their communications over time. I also just found very satisfying, especially when you're looking at the government's kind of mandating away from DIDCOM and it being more of an afterthought these days.
Well, I would love to talk about DIDCOM. Juan and I just got back from IETF, and we just had an extensive conversation yesterday with the DIDCOM group here about bringing that to IETF. So if you want to get involved with that, come to next Monday night's meeting, because that's what we're going to be talking about. And I think it's a reasonable hour for you guys. But I don't want to go off on that tangent. It's interesting because I've been to quite a few IIWs, and this is also my second DICE. And I actually found it super ultra technical and focused on these technical solutions. And like Agne, I felt like, okay, the technical solutions are going to work, but I did feel like there's a stuckness, and we saw that also last year at ITF, like there's patching on top of patching. Like a lot of these things are already based on what we have. Well, we've got these big servers, whether it's Amazon or, these hyperscalers, and we've got our Google and our Apple Play stores, and that's just a fact, and there's nothing we can do about it, and nothing's going to change there. And then trying to fix on top of that solutions that will work, but my sense was they're just getting more and more complicated and more fragile, and that like by building on top of this rather than really rethinking like, what do we really need in the self-sovereign identity area, and what's really the best architecture, I feel like we're gonna end up with something that works but isn't necessarily the most efficient and is really expensive. Like there was just these discussions about how expensive this is and how complicated it is, and what if you patch this on top of, and I don't understand them. Like I don't understand what they were saying. Okay, like let's just be real. I'm not that technical, but it felt to me like things were getting harder and not easier with this UD wallet thing. I don't know. What do you guys have to say to that?
I can chime in. I think I agree with that assessment, Grace. I keep hearing like, oh, we're done the final blah blah blah. I'm like, great. And then no, there's like more. And it's been doing that for a while. So, and I think, the EIDAS 2.0 legislation that this is all stemming from built on top of EIDAS 1. So which was a failure, right? So it was in the early 2000s, and it was this legislation to mutually accept each other's identity systems with a very complex array of middleware in the middle to enable it. So this said, okay, let's like not mutually accept each other's identity systems. Let's move to this new paradigm of like credentials and wallets, which I think was the right move, but it probably would have been better if they made that move not based on building this set of legislation on top of EIDAS 1, but just let it go and wrote something new, given that they are tightly bound in a regulatory framework where they have to follow all the rules. Like there's this interplay between the technology that's on the ground and the regulations and the law that is quite complex that they're in. So it seems like it would have been better. Like that's kind of where, if I was to redo, that's where I would start, is in that first piece of legislation that seems to put a new paradigm on top of an old paradigm and keeps pushing them together.
Yeah, so maybe if I can respond I'm not sure that it really does that, because EIDAS 2 basically rewrites the whole thing. And also technically they don't really interoperate in any way with the existing EIDAS 1 systems, which did work in some, mainly Northern Europe, right? But yes, it failed in the context of the EU in general. The main thing that it sort of builds on legally is the qualified concept, which is like real legal, like that's what qualified means when someone from the EU says it, who is a lawyer. And that's fine, because they would just have to redefine that anyway. But what I guess is like the more important thing is that you can also still do your own wallet. You don't have to do any EIDAS wallet. You can just do a wallet and just not have it be any EIDAS wallet. And I think part of my takeaway is basically that's what people are just doing anyway. So what Kaliya is saying is basically what is happening, what people are doing. Unfortunately, that means that who can most easily do that? People who have a lot of money to build a wallet, which is Google and Apple, essentially, right? And a few others, Cyrus, for instance, the Cyrus Foundation, which is a kind of a Yubico adjacent company. It's not really a company, or it's kind of a company, but it's also kind of a foundation. It's a bit complicated. But basically anyone could make a wallet, right, if they wanted to. The problem again is that there's no business model in making a wallet. So basically nobody wants to or should want to. Which is maybe fine, but also it is kind of like, it limits that, right? So it helps that the EU at least says, okay, here are like 27 implementations that have to exist, one for each member state. But it doesn't really help with the interoperability, right? Because what the EU legislation also does, it is sort of fixes some of the stuff, like not fixes in the sense of like solves it, but fixes in the sense of here are some particular choices you have to make. And this means that there will be probably more interoperability, which can help with adoption. And I think there's some sort of parallel to some extent to some of the DIT method stuff, where in some sense, like, yes, there are a lot of different DIT methods, but if you just have kind of like, if they're floating around, and nobody has like okay, these are the ones that you have to support, then people will only use like one of them basically, right? And I think that's kind of, maybe this is a bit of a hot take, but part of the problem with the DIT methods is that there is no central registry of which ones are there and how do you actually resolve them, right? And this means that it's very difficult to actually, go and do that. So people just have like one, essentially. And for wallets in general, that will also be kind of like, okay, now you issued something into my wallet, but what is it? Like, what can I use it for? And that's kind of part of what the EU solves to some extent by sort of making, okay, here is at least a list of like some stuff that we know what is. And this can help adoption, in my opinion.
I think that leads quite well onto a separate hot take, maybe not so hot take, that I had leaving DICE, which was technically, I think, like for example, within South Africa and maybe even the States, it's technically innovation that leads regulation. Whereas I think in Europe, it's very fair to say regulation leads innovation, especially with things like with these different standards and frameworks. And then, but as a result of that, you absolutely spot on. Do you then go and develop your own wallet, but then face the challenge of basically having to create a full value proposition beyond the means that's going to firstly actually say to people it's worthwhile for me to come and claim my own credential and get my counterparties to do the same so that I can actually benefit off it. I mean, it's the classic chicken and egg problem of adoption for verifiable credentials that you then face. So I guess it leaves, it doesn't leave too many options, but I think one way of viewing it, which I think I do to some degree, is technically, if you can then create like a specific value proposition that has an offering, but then you're waiting for the government to start issuing the credentials and populate the ecosystem, then you're positioning yourself for a business model in the long term and kind of preparing for that in the meantime. But I couldn't agree more around the challenges, especially with how stringent it seems to be within Europe, and how limiting that is for the speed in essence right now.
Yeah, but also to add to this, and I don't know if everyone else sees the same thing, but when we talk to customers, so I recognize that with the regulation and the government's implementation, it will be slow, the adoption will be slow, but the businesses, they will not wait until the end. So we see quite a lot of interest already implementing verifiable credentials, even though they're not available on the government level there yet. And I think all of us here are for that choice, and we're interested to get more adoption, because like, even if there are, Grace, I agree, like these technical details, there could be different choices, there could be better solutions, and something new always comes up. But at the base level, if we're at least working with new identity technologies instead of doing the SAMLs and everything else that happened before, we're already kind of on the same page. And then to Frederik's point, like, if when you implement one DID method, like, you will implement another one if there's a need. Like, you already know how it works, so it's not such a big choice as if like stepping this first step. So I think that at least for me, from DICE, that's also another big thing, that people are talking about it, people are understanding it, everyone knows that it's in the future, but it's not necessarily stopping companies of already talking and making architectures and trying to see how it fits in their like identity stories. So
Cool. I mean, I thought it was really interesting in DICE. One of the things that really struck me was that there was a tremendous amount of, maybe 2/3 of the discussion really was about the European wallet. And then there was like a third that was kind of random, like on all kinds of different topics. What were some of the topics that maybe you didn't think you would attend, or that you didn't attend and you were like, oh, I never knew that would show up, or yeah, that also struck you?
well, I can go first because I unmuted. So for me, the most interesting topic probably was the biomimicry, which I was not aware of before. So it was very interesting sessions and trying to understand identity from more like philosophical sense. So that was a bit of like a palate cleanser between the technical and the legal discussions, and go something more like higher level, just to kind of understand why we're doing and why we're having these boring legal technical discussions, really. So yeah, that was mine.
From my end, not as fun or philosophical, but just by chance, there was a conversation on PayPal and business wallets, which was quite theoretical, kind of for the future and the value that that can provide. And funnily enough, on my own accord, I'd been doing some research into that, so I was pleasantly surprised. I was practically having a conversation with the person prior to them choosing the session or hosting the session, and they mentioned, "Oh, PayPal and this," and I was like, please host a session on that. So I was very happy, and that was, I'd say, kind of off the path of what you would expect. So, but in a very positive way in my mind.
Maybe I was just boring and went to the sessions that I expected to see. So that that may have been part of it. But no, I didn't really see anything that I was like crazy out of the box, I think. I mean, the point of DICE was not necessarily to only be about digital identity wallets, right? It's just that it happens to be sort of what everyone is talking about this year because the EU set the deadline for this year. And of course, nobody will, once again, actually implement everything. But that's just the way it is, I guess. I mean, still, it's beginning to be something that people really want to talk about. So that's what I mostly talked about. But yeah, and I think I didn't see anything where I was like, "Oh, this was like super, like unexpected session."
Building on biomimicry, I hosted a session on bioregionalism, and so we talked about emerging, I guess, movements or philosophy to kind of consider the earth based on the watersheds and biomes that are on it as a complement to our human-made lines on the map. Given the fires in Europe, this may be a useful frame to start thinking about how do we care for the earth and help make sure that the water that falls is absorbed and retained for drier and hotter summers and things like that. So anyways, it's a good discussion.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the things that were quite interesting were that was kind of surprising. I mean, not surprising because wherever Matt Schutte goes, something really cool is going to be said. But he had some really interesting, completely different framings of how do you think about trust and how do you think about resilience versus rigidity. And that's why I brought up that question about things getting more and more complicated, like that there's like going to be there's the way of constructing this whole identity system that is really based on there's a path you're going to go through and it's going to be centrally controlled and everything's going to be certified and everything is going to be very rigid. And he brought this whole idea, and it was also around agentic AI, around more natural systems, like both of you have mentioned more natural systems, around like, well, what would it look like to have self-regulating AI, like, or self-regulating systems where groups are looking at each other. And it became really easy for me to envision, like, I could totally imagine people releasing like an AI, like an AI oversight AI group, like a group of AIs that are out there looking for the bad AIs, or the AIs that are out there looking for, the security breaching AIs and pointing them out. And he was talking about how social norms in human societies are enforced by people like looking at you and being like, hey, bro, we don't smoke around here or something like that. And how do we create those kinds of norms within like group norms or groups of AIs? It was a completely different architecture. I feel like it was like, I can't even quite express it. It blew my mind so much about, rather than trying to create these rigid paths that are the only path you go through, creating self-regulating systems. And it was quite inspiring because instead of being more complicated, it's what you would call more complex and more self-regulating. And and if it's just a completely different view of the world that represented than how, especially the EU is. It's like we're going to control everything and write a regulation that's going to take every every use case and every exception, and that seems so unrealistic every time I think about that. Like, oh yeah, what about that exception? Yeah. So that was kind of a refreshing one.
Something else interesting on the note of Matthew. I had one lengthy conversation with him on the first day, and I mean his mind is brilliant. So the way he'll kind of go through things and discussing with him is very fun. And part of the discussion we had is he said, I don't necessarily understand, and I'm worrying about misquoting here, so take it with a pinch of salt. But he roughly said that he doesn't understand the how verifiers don't have more responsibility. Everyone like obviously places the onus on the issuer with regards to verifiable credentials. And he kind of went on this discussion. It took me through how in his mind identity is in the eye of the beholder. So then, as a verifier, in essence, you trusting this issuer, but you need to understand that the issuer views that specific person in a specific way. Like, and I remember even arguing, saying like, no, well, for example, I have my ID number. And he says, okay, well, do you have another passport? Because you have one ID number in South Africa. If you have a Greek passport, you have an ID number in Greece. If you have two credentials, who's to say which is correct? And just throwing that out there is just quite an interesting point that was discussed, which kind of made me think quite a bit afterwards.
Yeah, no, I've never thought about having more than one passport and which country it might be accepted in. Anyway, but I think that's really cool, and that segues to, I mean, this is interesting. We have an audience here who accepts that as the verifier, DIF has brought cool people to talk, and they're in our audience now, and maybe they have questions for you guys. So are there any questions from the other participants here who have trusted us to be the verifier of the coolness of these speakers? If not, I will come up with another question, but I do want to give an opportunity to those who are attending to speak up. All right. I guess that's not going to happen. All right. So cool. So what did you guys feel were the biggest challenges or things that are still unsolved that you like went away thinking, oh, that's not going to work, or either around the EU wallet or around anything else? Like, what are the things that you went away saying, oh, wow, that one, yeah, I don't think we came to any good conclusion yet. We need to work harder on that.
I think for me, it's basically what you were just talking about with the identity is in the eye of the beholder, right? And that's true, but it often means that you just choose not to trust anyone. And so the benefit of the government sort of saying, you can trust me, this is like a qualified issuer or whatever, is that you are sort of legally shielded at that point, right? So you are legally allowed to trust them. And that means that you can actually, without doing a lot of work to find out if you trust someone, you can just actually do it. And I think that's like doing it outside of the government is a very difficult problem to solve, which is why people just generally don't, right? I mean, that's the sort of, in my mind, and maybe this is a hot take, is one of the sort of ugly truths of self-sovereign identity, is that yes, you can make an identity for yourself, and then you can kind of think of these schemes like state-endorsed digital identity and so on. But in practice, basically nobody will trust you except if the government also trusts you, right? So it doesn't necessarily actually buy you anything. Of course, there are some situations where that might happen, but usually that is only situations, in my mind at least, where you just already know the person, and that's why they trust you. So the digital identity doesn't actually really do anything. So to me, sort of solving that is one of the huge problems, right? And sometimes it can be someone other than, maybe it's a bank that you trust, but basically you just trust them because the government said that they had to do a bunch of stuff, and so you assume that they did all that stuff, and that's why you trust them. So you might as well just go directly to the government.
Well, I did have a question about that. Actually, I was wondering if it came up at DICE much. One of the things that hovers in the background of verifier trust or of any business wallet, identity wallet use case is that a lot of one of the sticking points in implementation is always the wallet attestation and the operating system attesting that the unmodified known binary is running, and this sort of like app store root of trust, which isn't exactly what you were talking about, but to me feels related because at some base level, you can't distrust every layer of the stack and still use a phone. So for me, like one of the uncomfortable things hovering in the background of all of this identity wallet talk is like, well, how do you can the verifier turn you away because you're using F-Droid? And the antitrust pressure to keep F-Droid available is sort of at odds with the business wallet process at the moment. So I'm wondering how that came up in sessions, if it came up at all.
Yeah, so this is a quite technical question, but yes, I mean, this is something that people worry a lot about, also in the governments, of course. So what basically is the question is, right, like, okay, if you trust the issuer to say the right thing about me, like what my name is or whatever, that's fine. Maybe that's the government and that's why you trust them, or maybe it's, some other guy that you trust for some reason, and you trust that the credential itself is true. But now I am sort of presenting that credential to you through some device, and how do you know that that device didn't just like change the name? And that's a good question. And there's kind of one answer, which is this attestation, and unfortunately it is kind of necessary for, well, security reasons that then turn out to be privacy reasons. So I often like to think of sort of, privacy and security are in some sense at odds with each other, in the sense that if you have full privacy, it's kind of hard to have security. But also, if you don't have any security, you usually don't have any privacy either, because anyone can just read all of your information, right? But let's say you have a wallet that you have someone that you trust to provide you with a wallet. How do you then know that it is actually the right wallet? And this is sort of the question of attestation, right? And yes, it's basically true that a wallet is just a program, and for a program to run, you need to sort of run it on some sort of device, and you need to trust that that device does what the program tells it to, and not all sorts of other stuff. And that means that you need to at least trust the hardware as a minimum. That's usually pretty easy for people because the hardware is just kind of like a CPU that if it did weird stuff, it would be very weird, like hard for it to do anything and people would notice, is kind of the argument there. It's not, there's kind of nothing you couldn't necessarily do about it, but it's generally the argument. And if you don't trust that, then all bets are off, right? And then you need to start physically going to the like factory and stuff like that, which some people do, but not most people. And also you don't have the option of doing that. Then you need to trust the operating system, because the operating system is what is talking to the hardware on your behalf. This is also not really negotiable. There's nothing you can do about it. But of course, what you can do is you can sort of install an open source operating system that you can read. So like not Google Android or not iOS. On an iPhone, you don't have an option. So now we're down to just Android. Or you could do it on some just like your normal computer, basically, where you could run Linux or whatever. But then you need to sort of say, okay, and how do we know that how does the verifier know that you didn't then lie about the information, that it actually came from the issuer? So it's actually not you. That when I say you here, I mean the verifier needs to trust that, right? And that's a difficult question. Basically, they need to trust the wallet. So on Android, you have the option of not using the closed source attestation mechanism. There is a fully open attestation mechanism where basically you take your program that is the wallet as the person who made the wallet. You then sort of sign over it and say, yes, this is what I think it should be. And the verifier can directly verify that without, for instance, Google being involved. And the Android team at Google is quite open to supporting this kind of stuff. It's not really something that they're fighting in any sort of material way. They even have libraries that sort of do it for you. But it does mean that you need to like trust whatever operating system it is. So if it's Graphene OS, you need to trust Graphene OS and not just the normal Google one. So it takes sort of some extra, again, it's a problem of you have to make a decision about who you trust now. Whereas if you just don't make any decisions, then you just trust Google. Or for some reason, people only talk about Google and not about Apple, right? Even though at Apple, the situation is much worse. Because you don't have any options. But this is something you can do. It's something that multiple governments are working on and supporting. Yeah, so it's I mean, the Danish state wallet, for instance, works on Graphene OS with attestation. My impression is that the German one will as well. I think the Austrian one does as well. So this is something that basically is being worked on and is sort of, that's the best you can do. There's nothing you can really, like, it's not a problem you can solve. It's just sort of like an inherent security problem. But the best you can do is to try to make it open and make the roots of trust sort of be opt-in so that you can select more than one. But it still requires people to actually think about who they trust, right? And that's generally difficult because it's hard to find people who are trustworthy in this space. And you even have the option of making a wallet that only works on Graphene OS and doesn't work on a Google phone.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I talk about this often, this trust question of like, because we're talking about trust, but it's like, we're talking in a very limited, like, I at least trust that this is the person who they say it is. And if the government tells me this is the person who they say it is, then I can trust that. And that's traditionally, we do believe that. Like, we don't trust our governments, but if the government issues a passport or a birth certificate, we're like, yeah, that's a real person, right? Like, at least we trust our government that much. But yeah, that was a super comprehensive answer. Does anybody else have anything else on this topic? Or do we want to move back to like what else might be missing?
I mean, there is another approach, and this is one that Anil John, who was in the US government working on these technologies for a while, did, which was just like, we don't actually have to know very much about the wallet at all. And the reason being is that the credentials and the cryptography in the credentials is what will help us trust the credential that's sent to us. Because if I am a verifier and I go look up the keys of the issuer, only the actual issuer could have issued this credential to the person that is presenting it. So why are we worrying about the phone and the wallet because trust the cryptography of the core technologies we're talking about. So I think, there's more than one pathway or way to think about how to trust these technologies. And one goes down a deeper rabbit hole into infrastructure than the other.
Yeah, part of it is that as the issuer, you also want to sort of only issue into wallets that you trust, right? And that's like I don't want, as a government, I don't work for a government, but if I worked for a government, I wouldn't, well, not anymore, but if I worked for a government, I wouldn't, want to issue into random wallets because it allows people to be scammed, basically. So it's really a privacy question. And yes, of course, you could say, but people should not install random wallets, but they will, and that's kind of the truth, right? So it's really
So the wallet could be a bad actor, you mean, and like take their information.
yes. So if I have, your passport data, for instance, I don't want to necessarily give it to, like, if I'm the issuer of passport data, I don't necessarily want to issue it into any wallet, because I don't know what that wallet is going to do. And the whole point of the EU certification thing is that they say, okay, well, we looked at the wallet and we know that it's only going to do stuff that it should. They also have to be open source, by the way, in the EU wallets. And they are. The Danish one is open source, for instance. That's the only one that's in production right now. But you can go read the source code if you want. And then you can sort of know that it's not going to, steal all your information. So that means I'm going to actually give information into it. And that's basically the reason to restrict it in that way.
Cool.
But of course, if you have a wallet where you don't have passports and you just have like random concert tickets and stuff, maybe you don't care.
All right. Well, we've got a few more minutes. If anyone has any last words, things we didn't bring up that they think people should know about DICE. I mean, obviously, the format of DICE and IIW really allows for a tremendous variety of things to come up. It's not pre-scheduled. But yeah, anybody else want to add a few things in our last minute?
I'll just throw in something. Firstly, I'll throw in a bit of praise for the format, exactly as you mentioned, which basically enables you with the freedom to decide exactly what interests you. I think we're all well aware of this, but it's technically, if you attend a traditional conference, you'll find the most interesting conversations are in between the different talks, and that's basically what it is 24/7. So I think it's really brilliant, and it just enables you to really focus on your own learnings. Like, honestly, I'm not even sure if Frederik and I had an overlap at the session. So, like, as a perfect example. So it's really just catered to what you want to learn. And I think that's what really makes it and what you fascinated on. And if you aren't, then you don't have to attend anything. And even just stood outside, you'll likely learn something new as well, just in a conversation with someone there. It's just as valuable. And then just to quickly answer your question, Grace, in terms of the challenges left unsolved, as I mentioned with the hot take, which is basically regarding like business wallets and the challenges we face within South Africa, and hearing that they still remain in Europe, I would say those answers to certain questions, especially that of like, if you think even like delegated authority, like if you're going to receive an employee credential, do you hold that within the business wallet? Do you hold that within your personal wallet? And then there was also questions about people expressing that they don't want any business related information held within their personal wallet. So they don't even want an employee credential within their personal wallet. So that question, I think, is something I'm still fascinated to get the correct answer to. And I think it's still left unsolved to the best of my knowledge. So, yeah.
We actually have members of DIF who are like, they're like anti-wallet. They're like, that's not how it's going to work, It's just going to be a widget inside some other app that does your wallet activities and, stop using the word. We have like anti-wallet people. So that's certainly up for debate. Anything else?
Yeah, I will just add as well. So from my side, from the unanswered questions, that I really want to compliment Frederik on his session on business models, because I think I agree that's my main takeaway. I was very curious to learn on the technological advancements and decisions and everything that's going on. But I think the biggest question now, and I think it also is all of our job to help answer it. Like usually you like as a product or technical person to leave this for the sales team or the marketing team, but I don't think they understand identity as technology enough to be able to do that properly without our help. So I think like we do need to continue, and like we're continuing this conversation, and I hope we'll have more public conversations about this as well. Like I don't think we should leave the business models up to, whoever to decide.
Great. Kaliya, any last words as the convener? And
we're gonna do it again next year. So I invite you all to, if you're listening, consider joining us at DICE or at IIW. Yeah, it was really fantastic. Frederik and his team did an amazing job of hosting the event, and yeah, they're going to work with us again. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are. We don't have the exact date yet, but coming soon. So stay on, go on the website and check it out, and we'll let you know probably sooner rather than later. But you know, in Europe, a lot of people are on vacation right now, so it's not a great time to make decisions like that. But
No.
soon that will be over, and then we can start thinking about those kinds of things.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So thanks everybody for the hot takes, and we'll be posting this in a week or two on our channels. Anybody who's a DIF member will have access to this right away. It just something automatically happens. But if you're not a DIF member, it'll be on our YouTube channel in a week or two. And if you're not a DIF member, join. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.